But anyway, so that's happening right now. So I guess maybe as we kick into 1 minute past 8, we should get started. And I should first of all start with a really big thank you for not watching the football, or in the case of the Birmingham group, finding a way to multitask, and for joining us on the results call this evening. So welcome to the call. My name, if you haven't met me yet, is Aaron Oxley. I'm the Executive Director here at Results UK. Special welcome to anybody who's here for the first time. Lucky you. We're doing one of the most exciting subjects, and certainly one of my favourites. And we have on the call, as we mentioned earlier, somebody here from Results Canada, Canada's Grassroots manager, in fact, the Navida of Canada, Melissa Dubé. So Melissa, very much a big welcome to you to our call. I don't know if you want to say hello to everybody or if you want to go incognito, but we've outed you. Do you want to say hi?
Sure, I'm happy to say hi, especially that I have a French accent, so usually people get a big kick out of that. It's nice to be part of the call. Thanks for including me.
No problem at all. Really, really welcome. And you know, it's always good to have members of the Global Results family joining in. So welcome very much. So this is our monthly get-together of grassroots campaigners from all over the UK. It's usually monthly, but this time it's only 3 weeks since our last call. It was moved back by a week because of our national conference, which a bunch of the people who are on here, this call with us were at. We're going to go back to normal timings for the next few months. So that's the first Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m. So you can mark your diaries like clockwork. We will be here. Whether you are new to Results or whether you've been around for many years, I really hope you're going to enjoy the call tonight and learn something from our expert speaker and from the questions that you're all asking. And this month, as I mentioned earlier, this call returns to one of my favorite topics, the issue of tuberculosis, which happens to be, very unfortunately, the world's most deadly infectious disease. I'm going to introduce our expert speaker for the evening. She's going to say a lot more about why the next couple of months are really important in the movement for the fight against TB. And in particular, we're going to hear a bit more about how things have moved on since our March Grassroots conference call, where we heard from Rosanna Fleury from the Global TB Caucus. And so how this month's action follows on from your hard work connecting MPs and their local media on World TB Day back on 24th of March. So before I do introduce our speaker, we'll have our usual few minutes reviewing the external context in which we work and what we've been achieving in the world with the help of all of you on this call. And particularly hearing about the actions you've all been doing around the UK to help achieve our mission to end global poverty. So first, 3 weeks ago, at the last conference call, we reported on a couple of things in the world of TB advocacy that had happened since the national conference. They were, first of all, a historic debate in Parliament on tuberculosis, first in 53 years, I think it was. And secondly, tuberculosis appearing in the communique of G7 leaders at their meeting in Canada at the start of June. Really a big deal, both of those things. Since these important developments, even more has been happening behind the scenes with staff in the Results UK office pushing forward as we head closer and closer to the UN high-level meeting on TB. First, we've been in very regular contact with the Right Honourable Nick Herbert MP. He's one of the MPs who co-sponsored the parliamentary debate that happened recently, and he's been a TB champion for many, many years now, since we first took him to the developing world to show him the realities of what TB looked like on the ground for real people. In the last couple of weeks, he's had a whole lot of meetings to encourage the UK government to show as much ambition as possible, including with the medical officer, the DFID permanent secretary, Matthew Rycroft, and the secretaries of state for both international development, that's Penny Mordaunt, and health, Jeremy Hunt. The UK is leading the negotiations at the UN on behalf of the EU, which makes the UK government's sense of leadership even more important. At the same time, we've been playing our part too. I personally met with both Alistair Burt, MP, who's the Minister of State for International Development, and also met with Matthew Rycroft and checked in with both of those on TB and the high-level meeting, even though the meetings were actually about something else. So I was a little bit cheeky, but you take every opportunity that you get. We've also been helping shape the collective position of TB civil society from around the world, helping create a common voice amongst the global TB advocacy community on what needs to come out of that high-level meeting. Again, our speaker tonight is going to say a bunch more about this, but one of the things that Results UK has been working particularly hard on is the whole idea around accountability. How do you stop a political declaration coming out of this process being just a piece of paper, grabs a few headlines, and then nothing happens and nothing changes? How do you get world leaders to hold themselves and each other accountable for actually delivering on the promises that they've made? And most importantly, how do you ensure that those commitments actually made in New York, long way away from where the epidemic's actually happening and killing millions of people, impacting millions of lives? How do you make those commitments turn into all the actual treatments, the diagnostics, the care that's going to benefit TB patients, that's going to diagnose more cases of TB, get people on treatment and save more lives? Really big questions. Lastly, in relation to our work on TB, to which your actions do make a really important contribution, we just had 2 Results staff members in Papua New Guinea the week before last, taking a delegation of journalists to see the reality of TB treatment in a remote and challenging environment. We're hopeful that those journalists are going to file some really interesting stories in global media outlets that will add to the sense of public interest in TB in the run-up to the high-level meeting. So if we hear any high-profile media pieces coming out of that trip, we're absolutely going to let you know. So that's enough intro from me. I'm going to pass it over to Naveed to hear about some of the great work that the Results Grassroots Network's been doing around the country this month. Naveed.
Thanks, Aaron, and apologies everyone, you may hear chanting in the background. Literally there's crowds right under the window. So firstly, just want to say a big thank you to everyone who started planning a local event during the summer months, a local event on aid. On the last call, I mentioned that we've created some resources that you can use as conversation starters to structure the conversations that you have with members of the public. These resources are now available from the office, so just give us a bit of notice and you can order them from us. We just need time to post them to you. If you want to see what they actually look like before you decide if you need them, then you can see the print files on the web page for the May action. So that's where I've put them. So if you go to the Get Involved page of the Results UK website, then click on Take Action in the menu on the left, and then select the action called Be a Development Champion. So that's Get Involved page of the Results website, then Take Action in the menu on the left, and then select the action called Be a Development Champion. And on that page is a PDF file of the resource. And in reality, they're printed onto A3 boards. Each of those has an example of or an aspect of international development. Some of them designed to show just how effective well-spent aid can be, such as on Gavi or nutrition or the things that we're familiar with. Others would maybe pick a bit more of a controversial issue, such as corruption or cash transfer programs, and aiming to address those kinds of issues in a bit more of a thoughtful way than we sometimes hear in the news. So you can, of course, use these as you want, as you see fit. There's a campaigns guide also on that same page, which describes them all and also has some links to further reading. But of course, you can use your own examples. You don't have to use ours. Anyway, best of luck with your events. And I wondered if anyone wants us to tell us about what you're planning anywhere around the country. I know that something's planned in London, so if no one else wants to start.
So we're planning a stall at St Margaret's Fair, which is a local summer fair near where I live, and we're planning about the stall and talk to people about aid and try and spread the message of everything that UK aid has done, and try and get some conversations going and kind of help put out the good side of what it's been doing.
Cool, thanks, Stephen. Anyone else around the country want to share where you're at with that? People might need to unmute themselves. I've been keeping people muted.
We can update you from Birmingham.
Please do.
So we decided instead of a single one-off event, we're going to make T-shirts that have got good stats about UK Aid and get them to various people who regularly run at parkrun events. So hopefully it should be over a series of events, however many times they wear the T-shirts. And we'll have hashtags and Twitter things for people to look up if they're interested. So that's what we're planning. Also, in terms of important events, it's Egla's birthday today. So I promised her I wouldn't tell you. So
Wonderful, congratulations. And what a creative idea. Anyone else?
Yes, I think we've got some plans up in Macclesfield. I think you mentioned this last week that we've been nicknamed Treacle Town for reasons that are too obscure and historical to go into now. But we have a regular market in the town centre, which is quite good. So Sanjay now thinks I'm going to dress up as a rooster, which may or may not be true. But certainly we'll be doing as much as we can to attract everybody's attention. And I'll be quite interested to look at the cards, actually, because for me, it's a red-hot issue that overseas, or it's not that, what's it called, official development assistance is really important. And we need to counter the kind of anti-ODA message that's prevalent in the press. So I'm quite looking forward to going out there with that message and seeing what kind of reaction we get.
Thanks, Ricky. That's brilliant. Good luck with that. Anybody else? It's not. I know there's quite a bit of time left. I mean, the idea is that these can happen any time over the summer, all the kind of local fairs and opportunities that you have. Okay, I'm just going to sort of add to what Aaron was saying on TB and the progress that's being made, because you've been making progress as well. So since the last call, we've been told of yet more actions on TB. So they've been coming in really right throughout the spring since March. So again, from Macclesfield, David Rutley MP reported that he's passed on your letter to Alistair Burt, who, as Aaron said, is the DFID Minister with responsibility for global health. And so thanks for passing on that intelligence, Sanjay. We've had quite a few of those responses now from Alistair Burt, and it's very clear that our concerns are definitely on his radar and are understood by the DFID civil servants who are working on TB, who some of you met at the national conference. We also heard from Rees in the Birmingham group, who shared an email from his MP, Gavin Williamson, agreeing that the government should do all it can through the UN to rid the world of TB. That's a quote from Gavin Williamson, who is, of course, the Defence Secretary. So it's great to have such a powerful ally behind the scenes, although given the politics around Brexit over the last few days, perhaps not so much, but we'll see. But that's really great work, and thank you, Rees, for that. Thanks also to Tom in Brighton, who shared a similar letter in support from Green Party MP Caroline Lucas. I'd also just wanted to flag up something that, again, Stephen in the London group did this week, which was a really comprehensive and thoughtful roundup of his experience at the national conference. His blog post is called Joining the Dots Together, and you've got a couple of ways of finding that if you'd like to read it. Either on the Results London group's blog page, which is resultslondon.wordpress.com. So that's resultslondon, all one word, .wordpress.com. Or you can go to the blog page on the Results UK website. And it's a really good piece of writing. I would thoroughly recommend that. And lastly, thank you to all of you who've been writing direct to government ministers on the Safe Schools Declaration, which we heard about on the last call. This was a bit of a different approach from other actions, and any intelligence we get resulting from the Disability Summit on the 24th of this month, we will share with you. But again, please do share any replies that you get back, and thanks again to Macclesfield, who once again struck early with a letter on that topic. Are there any more letters that people have got that I haven't been told about that you want to mention? I'm going to mute for a second.
Was that a goal, do you think, Naveed?
I don't know.
Colombia.
Oh. So lastly, just good luck to the Stort Valley group, who are planning to attend an event in Saffron Walden tomorrow evening, entitled Saffron Walden Cares About UK Aid. This particular event's been organised by Save the Children, who alongside Results are part of this UK Aid coalition. But I hope you get a really good turnout of new people to work with and help spread the word. So thanks once again to everybody. I'm going to go on to mute now and hand back over to Aaron to get into the business of the call.
Right, thanks, Naveed. That is great. At a very exciting time for the match. But no, this is way more important than that. And in fact, it's actually really a lot more exciting. This is the United Nations high-level meeting on TB. Now, high-level basically is kind of like NGO, international diplomat speak for head of state, right? So every time you see high-level meeting, what you're actually talking about are prime ministers and presidents. And those are the people that are really going to make a really big difference if they get involved in tuberculosis, which is the first time that they've ever been able to do that. So, as Naveed's just mentioned, quite a lot has happened since the last call on this subject back in March. Any of you who've received a letter from Alistair Burt will know that right up to the ministerial team, the department is firmly supportive of strong UK leadership on TB, and the department that's conducting negotiations on behalf of the EU right now. It's interesting that Rycroft himself, the permanent secretary, was checking with me saying, are we doing okay on TB? And I had to reassure him that the UK was, in terms of the civil servants and their negotiations. But as a lot of you know, we don't actually have the top level political leadership saying that they're going to go from the Prime Minister's office. We don't yet have Theresa May confirmed to attend, although we are starting to see momentum building with other heads of state confirming their attendance. It's shaping up to be really exciting. This is actually an absolutely perfect time to be hearing from our guest speaker about the latest global thinking on the high-level meeting and where we're at now in terms of advocacy to make the event as successful as we can. She's an old and dear friend of mine. Her name is Mandy Slutsky. She's the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Results Educational Fund, which is the name that they use over in America for Results US. She leads the charge on tuberculosis for the Action Global Health Advocacy Partnership, of which Results has been a member for well over a decade. She plays a central role in international coordination of advocacy within the Results and Action networks, and right in all of the world civil society around the run-up to the UN high-level meeting. And I believe she's joining us from holiday in rural Wisconsin, where it's only 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Mandy, hi and welcome.
Thank you.
So look, a really warm welcome to you. Thank you for taking time out of your holiday to speak to us. Really, really appreciate that. Let me briefly introduce you to who we've got on the call. We're joined tonight by volunteer campaigners from all over the UK, very similar in enthusiasm to the Results US Grassroots. We have varying levels of experience on the call, but everybody here is really keen to take concrete and measurable action to help overcome global poverty. They're, of course, really looking forward to what you have to say and keen to get moving. We've got 3 pre-arranged questions for you, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions from all over. For those of you who are on your computers, you can feel free to ask a question using the chat function, which is on the side of your screen. For those of you that have joined by phone and have a mobile, you can text in if you'd prefer not to ask your question verbally. The number to text tonight is 0777 56 11178. I'll say that again, 0777 56 11178. But before we get into the questions, Mandy, I always like to ask our guest speaker to spend a couple of minutes describing who they are, why do you care about this work, what is your role, and what do you do, and really what personally gets you out of bed in the morning to campaign on TB?
Thanks, Aaron. So yes, I'm Mandy, and I'm joining from my holiday in a very remote part of Wisconsin, which is state in the middle of the country all the way to the north, on Lake Michigan. I got involved in TB for the first time in 2005 when I was and can you hear me well? Just okay. When I was studying abroad in South Africa in Cape Town, and I had classes in the morning, I didn't have any classes in the afternoon, so I started volunteering at an orphanage called Baphumelele in Khayelitsha, which is a very large township outside of Cape Town. And in 2005, for those of you that know a little bit about South Africa, up until 2003, antiretroviral drugs, which treat people with HIV and prevent the virus from spreading and continuing, were not allowed in the country. And so there was the lawsuit that happened that allowed it to get in the country. And so I was seeing kind of the HIV epidemic and also the TB co-epidemic very up close in these children, many of whom were orphaned by AIDS. And I didn't know a lot about TB at the time, but seeing these kids, many of whom were HIV positive and got TB, really was quite shocking and jarring to me, and made me go into public health as a profession. So I got my master's in public health. I spent 3 years working at the National Institutes of Health in outside of Washington, D.C., where I worked on laboratory safety as an infectious disease specialist, and worked a lot with Ebola and monkeypox and some other crazy things. And then I spent about half a year living in Bangladesh, working with BRAC, doing a fellowship on maternal health, and came back and did some student teaching before starting at Results over 8 years ago. So I have been working on TB for over 8 years. Reason I really care about it is because it is so neglected, and I am interested in other infectious diseases, but it's just shocking that this is the infectious disease that kills the most people, and we know the least about it. And part of that is due to the amount of, political neglect that the disease has had, not just by the public, but also by public health professionals. I remember getting my master's in public health, and until I started working at Results, I was unaware that TB could happen outside of the lungs. And so it took until I had my master's degree in epidemiology in infectious disease to actually understand, of course you can get TB outside of the lungs. It's a bacteria, it can move around the body. So I feel like this is a really exciting time because we've seen so much change over the last 10, 15 years in global health. When I went back to Cape Town a few years back, I saw huge differences. I visited the orphanage again. It is a completely different, everything is different. The children are so much healthier, so much happier. There's lower new incidents of HIV. TB is being treated, it is being caught. And just in general, the rates of malaria, the rates of HIV are going down. But the one thing that seems to remain constant is TB is not really keeping up with the pace of the rest of the global health successes that we've seen. And so that's why myself and Erin and your other colleagues at Results UK have been pushing so hard to get high-level political attention on this disease, because there's just not enough political push that we've seen for other things.
Mandy, that's actually a great introduction. I've known you for almost all of those years that you've worked at Results, and even I learned something new about you just at monkeypox. Really? Let's have a conversation about that later on. But let's go straight into the questions then. The first one is coming from Stort Valley. Who from Stort Valley is going to throw Mandy the first question?
Corinne. I'm asking the first question. Mandy, really interesting to hear your background and how knowledgeable you are in the area. We've been told that 2018 is a really big year for the fight against TB, but is it really such a big deal? We're seeing TB being mentioned at the G7 and G20 summits, for example. So is this really going to make the big difference that we're hoping for?
I think it can. I really, really do. And the reason why I think it's such a big deal is because it's forcing heads of states, make sure I have the video here. It's forcing heads of state to think about and talk about a disease that has been consistently neglected. And this often only gets dealt with at lower levels, sort of politically. The National TB Program Manager, which usually ranks quite low within a national Department of Health. Then there's health ministers, many of whom don't really talk about TB the way they talk about other diseases. And now this is forcing them and ministries of foreign affairs and all the way up to the prime minister and presidential head of state level to actually talk about this disease. So I think just getting this high level meeting and getting, even getting prime ministers to be asked questions about it is a huge win, because they're probably like, well, what is this tuberculosis? Is this still really they're probably asking the same questions that my family asks me, which is this still a problem? Like, I thought that was back in Charles Dickens' days. I didn't know people still got TB. How many people really get it? Isn't there a vaccine? And the same questions that, you guys are probably answering, many of your friends, why are you working on this? You're saying this is actually the world's leading infectious killer. And it is a, disease problem, but it is also a political problem. And so this is forcing on the agenda of the highest level, political place that you can get to talk about this and to start saying, okay, well, what do we need to do to fix this? And we're outlining, okay, here's what you can invest resources. You can make sure that there are better ways to get R&D for new tools. You need to make sure that every person in your country is being diagnosed and treated and given prevention therapy. We need to make sure that people are treated, regardless of where they are or who they are or, what their background says about them. And we need to make sure that this is all happening through kind of some sort of independent accountability mechanism. So I think even if we don't get everything that we want out of this meeting, and even if it's, overshadowed by other things that happen at the UN General Assembly, or if it doesn't receive the media attention that we think it should, it doesn't mean it's not a win, because there are papers and there are questions and things getting to the desks of heads of state. And that's what I think matters, because they're going to start asking questions to their ministers. Hey, how are we doing on TB? Do we still have, 600,000 deaths a year in this country? Not deaths. Well, yeah, in some places. And the thing that I think is so exciting about this is that it is getting heads of state from the BRICS countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, engaged. And those are the countries that have some of the highest rates of TB and drug-resistant TB in the world. And India has gotten more engaged in TB throughout this whole process. In March, Erin and I were in New Delhi, and there was a NTB Delhi summit. And Prime Minister Modi actually made a 25-minute speech just about TB. And you could tell the beginning was, crafted, hey, we've invested, we want to end it by 2025. You think, oh, it's probably not possible, but really great to try. And then he kind of went off script and was just talking about the importance of anyone can get this disease. It's not just the poor. And we need to make sure that everyone that has this disease, receives not just treatment, but nutritional support. And you're having this, head of state of like one of the largest countries in the entire world and the highest burden of TB in the world, talking about ending this disease within the next few years. And that level of ambition is very exciting. So I think that, yes, this is a really important meeting. I think it's actually going to make big waves moving forward.
Thanks, Mandy. That's a great summary. And yes, you're right. You can see when the Prime Minister of India goes off script, because a whole pile of very senior civil servants start to look extremely nervous as he keeps speaking.
Not as nervous as when my president goes off script.
Well, 13th of July, let's see how it goes. But keeping it nonpartisan and moving on. Great answer. Let's go over to our second question, which is going to be from Sheffield. Oh, hang on. I'm not sure we can hear you, Sheffield. Just a minute. Can I do this? No, I can't unmute you. I think you're on mute, unfortunately. No, at the Naveed, can you unmute the mobile that's called in?
I can't. Oh, the mobile. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe.
Better now.
There we go. We've got you.
There we are. Okay, great. That's good. Yeah, I thought I'd try from the mobile instead. So the question from here is, what outcome can we realistically expect of the high-level meeting, and how have the negotiations for the political declaration been coming along?
So I think the political declaration negotiations have been going better than expected. But let me first go into what I think we're going to get out of the high-level meeting. So we had 5 key asks that we came up with as a TB community, and that's civil society, that is TB doctors, that is nurses, that is other professionals and scientists. So the first was to reach all people by closing gaps on TB diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. And the major goal that we're pushing for and target is getting 40 million people detected and properly treated by the end of the year 2022. So that's people that we're currently finding, but also the people that are missing, that aren't being found. So that's the whole cumulative 40 million people. And that's a big thing that we've been pushing for, and I think that will end up in the final declaration. There's also targets within that to getting people on preventive therapy. And right now it's, is it going to try and get 30 million people, or we're going to try and get 80 million people? Right now, there are only 1 million people in the world that access preventive care. So you were either going to increase that by 30 times or 80 times. I think either one is a win at this point, just having it mentioned in the document. The second ask is to transform the response to be equitable, rights-based, and people-centered. There is a lot that we still have to do in this area. This is kind of the sort of human rights aspect of TB, making sure people can actually access treatment, make sure we're targeting prisoners, other key affected communities, and removing discriminatory laws. I think that there's been a lot of work by a group of people that are lawyers that work on human rights issues that have been pushing specific language in the outcome document, and I think it will be a huge step forward for TB. I don't think it's going to be perfect, but I think it will be very helpful, and that people are starting to see, you need to address this as a public health problem and not necessarily bring in all of the other issues. There was also a big win this week in Kenya in the courts that found that basically they were imprisoning people who weren't taking their TB treatment, and instead now they're going to isolate them in hospitals as opposed to putting them in prison. So there are wins happening on this. The third ask is to accelerate development of essential new tools to end TB. And so there are kind of specific targets about what we really need that a lot of R&D advocates, research and development advocates, are pushing for. And I hope that language stays in. And then the fourth and fifth asks are what I believe are most important. The fourth is investing the funds necessary to end TB. Now, this is something that has gotten pushback during the negotiations. We're saying, hey, we need to get $13 billion invested to end TB per year by 2022. That's what's needed. Not for R&D, just to run countries' TB programs. We already have a good chunk of that. Most of it is coming from domestic sources. For example, India pays for most of India's program. Brazil pays for most of Brazil's TB program. For countries that have less funding, such as Zambia or Tanzania, they get a lot of funding from the Global Fund. And I know you guys do a lot of work around the Global Fund. We're saying that everyone needs to increase, and we're not saying, this country needs to increase and this country doesn't have to. We're saying cumulatively, we want 13 billion. Now, there's been some pushback from some countries that don't want to feel like they're already giving so much. I don't know. we won't name countries, but and we're saying no, it's actually a fair share. We need to take a fair share approach. We also really want a specific target for investment in research and development to close a gap of $1.3 billion a year. So really hoping that that language stays in. I think if we're able to keep that language in the final document, it will be a huge win. Just moving forward to try and convince countries to increase the amount of resources they spend on their own health budgets and on TB, and also to increase investment in the next global fund replenishment. And then the last ask, which Aaron actually knows the most about, it is to commit to decisive and accountable global leadership, including, I think, independent regular UN review and reporting. So that's saying, hey, we actually want another high-level meeting in 5 years to assess where we're at, and we want to make sure there is some sort of independent accountability mechanism, such as kind of a review panel of experts that look at the data that comes in. And we don't want that to be the WHO, because the WHO is effectively governed by health ministers. It's almost like the health ministers are the board of directors of the WHO. They tell the WHO what they can and can't do in a way. So the WHO can't really sort of, for lack of a better word, police countries and health ministers to say, hey, you're not reaching your targets, when they're also taking direction from those same health ministers. So we were hoping that there would be some sort of independent kind of council that will review the data that WHO collects. And be able to kind of issue a report every year that is a bit more political in nature, saying, you know, who is making strides and who is falling short. And I think the negotiations started off a little tough, to be honest. There was some pushback against some of these key things, such as even mentioning a financial target. A lot of countries are saying this isn't a replenishment. We don't want to promise that we're, you know, going to spend a certain amount of money. You know, we have to go through our legislature to do that. And we're saying, no, we want everyone to commit to this global financial target, not individual. We'll figure out what it means country by country moving forward, but we can then point back to say, hey, you signed on to this political declaration and it says we need $13 billion. What are you going to do to help us achieve that? So I think unless Aaron has other inputs on that, I think things are going relatively well. I think they could be going much worse than they are. So I'm trying to remain optimistic. I think any sort of political declaration that at least has these basic targets is going to be a big win for us. So we're working very hard to make sure that that happens.
Thanks, Mandy. And I think you're highlighting that it's the process that is almost as important as the outcome, which I think leads us quite strongly into our next question, which is going to come from our friends in Birmingham who are sitting outdoors and drinking Prosecco.
Hi. Our question is, why is it important for heads of government to attend the high-level meeting?
The reason I think it's important is because they are the head of the government. And so, you know, the buck stops with them. And so I think it's really important to have a head of government there to sign this document, to hear what people have to say and to make commitments. So they're thinking when they head back home after the UNGA, I know there's lots of other things that are going to be discussed, nuclear issues, human rights issues, but at some point they will come back and ask their health minister. So we signed this document, you know, I was there, I said we would do all these things on TB, what's the plan? How are we going to make that happen? We just really want this to be in the minds of heads of state, that it actually gets to them, because they have more power than Minister of Health politically. And, you know, there's something to be said. Some heads of state, you know, don't travel much or are politically difficult, maybe not best to be at the high level meeting. Think of a few. I know we're bipartisan, but anyways, I'm on holiday, so I can say what I think. But in general, I think it's just really important to get heads of state together to talk about an issue that I think is truly bipartisan. TB is not something that should be controversial. It is something that affects all of our countries. It is something that we should, be wary of, because diseases don't respect borders. Bacteria can replicate. Bacteria can become drug resistant. And this is something that affects all of us. And it's important for all of us to come up with a solution, because let's say TB is eliminated in one country. That's not good enough. It travels by air. It's airborne. So, someone gets on a plane and they land in the country that's eliminated. I mean, it's also the complicated thing about TB. It's not just airborne, but it's also most people that have TB have a latent form of it where it's in their body, but they don't know they have it because they're not actually sick. And they have a 1 in 10 chance of a lifetime chance for that like latent form to kind of reactivate. It's almost like how people get chicken pox and can later get shingles. Like it lies dormant. And so it's just really, really important for heads of state to understand that this is a political health issue that needs it's a public health issue that has a political solution as well.
Thanks, Mandy. And I think that links really quite strongly to what you were saying earlier about accountability. The health ministers are powerful people, but they're not as powerful as heads of government. And when the head of government says we are going to do this thing, then the Minister of Finance hopefully listens and makes some extra funding available and gives the Minister of Health what they need in order to get the job done. If the Minister of Health says we're going to do this thing and someone cuts their budget, well, we've seen how that plays out. You really struggle to deliver what you would otherwise like to do. So I am going to pause on the pre-arranged questions, in fact, because we've run out, and we're going to go both to the phones and to the chat. I haven't noticed anybody asking questions in the chat. One thing I will say is that Results has been campaigning on tuberculosis for a really long time. And so I know there are people on this call that know the ins and outs of this nasty little bug, backwards, forwards, and sideways. But I also know there's some people on this call that is not as familiar with the disease. So this is really your opportunity. Mandy is a super duper expert on this. So this is really your opportunity to ask one of the smartest and most informed people in the world about like all sorts of things to do, both with the disease and with the global effort fighting it, and with the high-level meeting. So there is really no stupid question at this point in time, really, truly, because we're here to make sure that everybody understands how important this is right from the ground up. So I am going to check my phone. I don't see any questions come in there, so I'm actually just going to throw it open. Does somebody have a question for Mandy?
Is there a way to monetize TB research? That is a very good question. So part of the reason, just based on your question, makes it seem as if you understand that the problem in TB is there is no money in TB. So if you find something really cool about the disease, you don't actually get any sort of prize or payout. There's a lot of reasons for that, mainly that a lot of, and not to stereotype, because we always say anyone can get TB, but a lot of people who get TB are from the poorest communities across the world. And so these aren't necessarily people that are going to be able to pay for some fancy drug. And so there are a lot of incentives that can be put together to incentivize private companies or public-private partnerships, or even the public sector to invest in TB. One of them that is getting some traction is called the Life Prize. And it's a way to kind of pool investment in TB and also initiate prizes along the way. So if you develop some, type of, and another complicated thing in treating TB is it's not one drug that treats it. It's a cocktail of drugs. And so that's, if you develop one drug, you have to know how it interacts with the other 3 or 4 drugs that are needed. And this is just regular TB, not even drug resistant. So if 4 different companies own the 4 different drugs, how do you make sure that they're in a clinical trial together? And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get companies who own particular drugs to work together to develop what we call a regimen, which is just a cocktail of drugs, and figure out what works best. But it would be at different phases along the way getting prizes. Those prizes would have to be enough money to incentivize the private sector into actually spending time on this, because they're already getting way more money off of cholesterol medication, heart medication, impotence medication, whatever. You come to the US, you watch TV, you see like every other drug, every other commercial is for a drug. So there is money in the pharmaceutical sector, but we need to incentivize it. So yes, I think that there is a way to do that. I just think we need to get really creative. But the public sector does need to do that first set of investment. And then there is what we like to call the valley of death, where a product or a molecule can be developed like a drug, but there is no one that's willing to kind of take it through the course, the process to actually get it into clinical trials in humans. And that's where I really think that the public sector is needed, because if there's not investment from the private sector, it's up to the public sector to make it happen. Okay.
Thanks, Mandy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take it away from R&D for just a second, because otherwise I'm imagining we could spend the rest of the 13 minutes we have going down that rabbit hole and talk about just that forever. Let's talk about India. India is the country with the highest TB burden in the world, and a country that has come out swinging at the Prime Minister level with some really bold commitments. The question from Korean is, in terms of the Indian objective to end it by 2025, what steps are they aiming to take first? And to help Mandy out, I quickly Googled and found a great website, which I'm going to paste into the chat for those of you that are following along on the chat, but I'm going to let her also have a go at answering.
So one thing interesting about India, and actually many countries specifically in the Asia or South Asia region, is that a lot of people get treated in the private sector, not the public sector. So something that India is really focusing on is making sure that there is some uniformity in how TB is treated amongst the private sector, and actually incentivizing the private sector to not just treat these cases, but to report on them, so that they know how many people are getting sick and how many people are being treated. And there is obviously the sort of the carrot and the stick approach. Sometimes they get, positive incentives, and sometimes it is negative incentives. And there's a lot to be said about both of those, but they're focusing on getting the private sector is a huge piece of it. Then another thing, which was actually the next question that came out about nutritional support, they're actually trying to not just get people on treatment, but to provide sort of overall nutritional, psychosocial support networks that will help people not just access care, but stay on care. And that's a huge piece of it. And so peer-to-peer, support groups, psychosocial services, a lot of side effects of taking medication actually can be depression. You also can feel isolated, whether or not, you actually have to go through physical isolation during the period where you're infectious. And so there's just a lot of side effects. It's just really, really important. There's also a lot of work being done in India and in other countries to try and eliminate catastrophic costs, which I forgot the exact definition, but it's basically a catastrophic cost, like it's more than 20% of your income or something like that. But if you get sick and you're the sole provider for your family, you're unable to work, and then maybe you're unable to take care for your children, or what happens, when there's no income for your family, how are you going to get to the hospital every day to get your drugs, things like that. And so making sure that there is financial support for families, and that they are either reimbursed or given support, not just for the medication itself, but for the whole continuum of care throughout their treatment.
Mandy, that's great. And I've just also found another article that I'm going to post in the chat that talks explicitly about that nutritional support program that India has very recently launched. While we were there, Prime Minister Modi launched it to really join up the dots between poor nutrition and tuberculosis outcomes. The fact that you really need to to do that. Coming back to research and development for just a second, again, another question from Corinne and also from Jill. I'll combine them sort of together. You know, you can see them in the chat there, Mandy, but, you know, for those that are just on the phone, you know, questions about the international research community trying to figure out how do we get these complicated drugs, diagnostics and vaccines to market faster? What's the critical path, and are companies, academics and others following it? And are we actually winning? Are we making progress on a vaccine, drugs for children, better diagnostics? Because of course, for those of you that have been working on TB for a long time, will know that the main diagnostic that we still use to diagnose TB was invented in the 1800s. It consists of spitting on a slide and looking at it under a microscope to see the bugs. It's a slightly more complicated than that, but in essence, we're still actually using in most cases, an archaic diagnostic, and we need way more R&D. But anyway, Mandy, over to you to answer the question.
So for the first question, most of the people who work on TB don't do it for the money. So they really do care. And there are conferences and international kind of forums where people bring their new research to light. So I do think they are using a critical path approach and sharing results if they get anything helpful. Part of the problem is that there are some companies that are holding on to certain drugs and not using them, and that can be quite complicated. If you're interested in learning like kind of where we're at in terms of all of this, the Treatment Action Group has what they call a pipeline report that they put out every year. I think it's actually going to be coming out at the International AIDS Conference, which is later this month. It is a fascinating look on where we're at in HIV, TB, and hepatitis C in terms of drugs, diagnostics, vaccines, and basic research, which goes into the next question is sort of, are we making progress on a vaccine or drugs for children? On drugs for children, yes. There was a few years ago investment by Unitaid, which the UK actually gives money to, which went to TB Alliance in New York. They basically, Global TB Alliance for Drug Development, developed not necessarily a new drug, but a fixed dose combination, which means that there are all of those multiple drugs in one pill that can be given to children. The reason this is such a big deal is because before that, they were kind of guessing how much of a medicine a kid needed in order to get better. And parents were forced to kind of crush up pills and guesstimate, and they weren't entirely sure what they were doing, mixing it in applesauce, force feeding it to a kid. Now you can actually treat it with one pill per day. They actually have it in liquid form in different flavors. If any of you have ever tried to give medicine to a kid, you know it's not very easy. So that is actually, I think, a huge win. Unfortunately, because of a lot of cost issues, I don't even think this is available in the US easily, but it is available in high burden, low income countries. And it's being rolled out in Kenya and South Africa and other places where there are really high burdens of childhood TB. And I think that is a huge, huge win. I think that kids are now becoming a bigger part of clinical trials and people are really starting to pay attention. In terms of vaccines, I wish I had better news for you. I don't have a lot of confidence, and this is sort of my own personal opinion, in a TB vaccine at the moment, because we still don't understand some very basic things about the bacteria that I think you need to understand in order to develop a vaccine. For example, I could be exposed to TB and get latent TB. Aaron could be exposed to TB and get sick. We don't know why Aaron got sick and why mine stayed latent. We just don't know. It could be a variety of environmental factors, genetic factors, any sort of thing. And we don't entirely know that. And until we figure out why a disease stays latent and becomes active, it will be really hard to figure out a vaccine, and especially target a vaccine to the people that need it most, which are people who are living with latent TB that could become active.
In short, it's quite complicated. But I put in the chat links to the pipeline report that Mandy was talking about, where if you start to dig into that, you'll discover it's even more complicated. But the reality is that we are making progress despite the challenges. We have two quick questions from Corinne and Peter again, but they've already asked questions, so I just want to make sure. I'm getting loads of WhatsApps about the game, so if anybody's sent me a text message about this and I've missed it, I apologize immensely.
I can answer the question about the guinea piggery.
Okay, go ahead. I think
that's
Mandy.
Really important.
We've only got 4 minutes, so try and keep it short if you can.
The answer is I don't think it is.
Mandy, could you repeat the question, because not everyone can see.
Oh, sorry. Is the rollout of child vaccines in low-income countries another form of guinea piggery? So it's not a rollout of child vaccines, it's a rollout of treatment. I don't think it's guinea piggery because it's gone through all of the clinical trials. But what's really exciting about what's been done on this particular drug for kids is that communities were involved in the development of the drug and in the rollout of the drug. And so it's actually people who are most affected being involved in the rollout of this drug. And so I think that's really important to note that this isn't something that we don't know. We know it works. What we didn't know was how to put it in one pill. Or one sort of dose.
And I would say also, Results UK, full disclosure, Results UK does have a tangential connection to this drug in that our former tuberculosis policy officer, Rachel Crockett, who some of you will know from national conferences, was actually working for the WHO and helped get that drug through approval. Not that that's the reason we like it, but just to let you know, the TB world is actually pretty small, and you know we're connected through to a lot of the most exciting things that are going on because there are not a lot of actors in the TB world, and I think that really speaks to how important the action we're asking you all to take tonight actually is. As Mandy mentioned earlier, you know, almost everyone you talk to about this disease will come back to you and say, "What?" Because they think it's sorted out. They think it's done. They think the vaccine works. Didn't I have that when I was a kid? Aren't I immune? And yet it remains, very sadly, the world's deadliest infectious killer. We have only 2 minutes left. So unless I'm gonna go to the phones and the chat for one very, very last chance for an urgent question from Mandy. And if not, I'm going to ask you, Mandy, to say just one final word about tuberculosis, antimicrobial resistance, high-level meetings, and how do we stitch all of this together into a big victory for the world and for the people in it?
I think the key is to focus on political leaders first, and then the public second. I think the most important people that need to know about this disease are the political leaders. And so the more that you can do to talk to your elected representatives and heads of state about this disease, the better, because they're the people that need to know. Once we get that head of state, for example, once President George W. Bush understood the magnitude of HIV and malaria, he's the one that actually set up PEPFAR. He's the one that set up the President's Malaria Initiative. And I would argue that those two, combined with the Global Fund, have been part of the reason that malaria deaths have been cut by half for children under 5. I mean, that is a huge win. And so it's once that happened actually is when the public, I think, started noticing and knowing what HIV and malaria were a bit more. So I actually would focus on political leaders. And I think that we are getting where we need to go. I think another big thing that you guys have been doing and that Results UK has been leading on is getting media attention, because when people read an article, they might think, wow, I didn't realize that you know, TB is still such a problem, or I didn't realize it was drug resistant. That's actually when I get more questions from family and friends, like, hey, I read this article in the New York Times or this article in The Economist. I heard blah, blah, blah. And then they ask a question and get more engaged. So I would say keep engaging your elected officials and keep engaging the media.
Thanks, Mandy. And I think one of the things that around this month's action, around asking Theresa May if she personally is going to attend. Sometimes, we've talked in this call earlier about some countries that are leaders and some countries that are laggards in the world in the fight against TB. There's no country in the world that's doing enough. Every country can do more, or else it wouldn't be the world's deadliest infectious disease. But if we were to have a league table, the UK would be at or near the top on quite a number of different factors in the global fight against TB. We're not asking Theresa May to go over to New York and apologize for not being a world leader. She can take that stage with a strong degree of confidence that she's got some really good things to say about the UK's contribution through the Global Fund, through research and development, through our biotech industries, and a lot of other ways that the UK is really leading the charge on TB. So it's not a particularly difficult thing for her to take the stage and claim to be doing lots of good things, because she can definitely do that. So I'm going to end the call there. We're 1 minute over. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Only +2 minutes tonight on the call. I just want to say, Mandy, huge thank you to you for taking the time to speak to our network tonight, giving us your perspectives on the high-level meeting, also your thoughts on why it's such an important opportunity for us here in Results UK, and indeed globally, to persuade our political leaders to attend in September. So thanks a lot.
I hope you guys win the match.
Well, it's apparently gotten really exciting just a minute ago, so let's see what happens. I'll wrap it up really quickly. This month's actions contain everything you need to know to take action, including what's changed since we last spoke on TB, and why, having first gone through your MP to get to DFID, it's now our turn to turn our attention directly to number 10 and let Theresa herself know why she should include this on her trip to New York, because you bet she's going. I'd also like to thank those of you who, alongside this monthly action, are also planning your summer events on aid. Looking forward to hearing more about those and what you will get up to. So, of course, a huge thank you from me and from All Out Results, and of course for all of those people who will never join our calls, but who benefit from our advocacy through more and better aid, targeting those living in poverty, the most vulnerable and marginalised, that are really going to benefit from the solidarity that we're showing them tonight. Look, we're going to send you some case studies to help start off your conversations on international aid. Make sure you're getting those. Good luck to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you so much for making time tonight to be on this call. It really makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Mandy.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Jill.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Corinne. Bye, Naveed.
Bye.